Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So, the title of today's episode is A War of Cities. And why did I decide to go with that name? Well, if you go back to the war between Iran and Iraq, as the conflict stalemated, both sides started to target each other's cities with ballistic missiles. The Scud missile became a very familiar name outside of the first Gulf War between the United States, Iraq, and its coalition partners. But clearly, the Ukrainian side is starting to pick up its strikes, the amount of cruise missile drone strikes against targets in Russia proper. Not just targeting areas within the conflict zone, but areas outside of what could be defined as the immediate conflict zone. Now, look, the Russians are doing the same thing. The Russians are hitting targets throughout Ukraine. Now, would the Ukrainians and their Western handlers be hesitant about launching said strikes, such as the recent strikes that occurred near Moscow or in Moscow, if their quote-unquote counteroffensive had been successful? Would we see these strikes against targets inside, deep inside the Russian Federation, if in fact the Ukrainian counteroffensive would have been successful? And the answer to that is probably not. If the Ukrainians would have been successful on the ground in retaking territory from the Russians, then the likelihood that we would then see Ukrainian attacks in places such as west and near Krasnodar, areas near, obviously, Moscow, and other places as well. Would we see that? Again, probably not. We do know within the last 48 hours plus, the Ukrainians have taken appalling casualties. We have seen time and time again of these columns of Bradley armored infantry fighting vehicles just getting decimated, utterly destroyed by anti-tank guided weapon systems, Lancet kamikaze drones, LMUR long-range tactical missile systems, and direct engagement with Russian T-72 Bravo 3s and T-90M main battle tanks. The appetite for the Ukrainians to take those kinds of casualties is going to start to wane. Already we have seen a decrease in the proficiency of the Ukrainian fighting force because of attrition. It has happened. The Ukrainian military, and specifically some of its better units, were performing much better earlier in the conflict. Now, again, remember, in many cases, they were on the defensive. They were not being tasked with offensive operations against a very well dug-in enemy force. It appears that Ukraine's Western handlers have greatly miscalculated the wherewithal of Russian forces located especially in the Zaporizhzhia area of operations. These units, once they become engaged with Ukrainian forces, are not running away. They're fighting. But more importantly, we're seeing Russian doctrine, adapt and overcome with what it's seeing on the ground. You hear that a lot in the United States military, Marine Corps, U.S. Army. Adapt and overcome. Find a way. The Russians are doing it. The Russians are coming to grips with drone warfare. We're seeing the Russians deploy a lot more drone systems. The Russian electronic warfare capability, already fairly significant at the start of this conflict, has drastically improved. Tell me, when is the last time you have seen Bayraktar TB2 drone footage? When is the last time that has occurred? You haven't seen it. Because the Russians have adapted to those systems and now have a way to jam them before they even get over the battlefield. You're not seeing those TB2 drones anymore. In places such as the Ethiopian Civil War, fighting against Tigrayan hill fighters, a little bit different than facing the Russian military. The Azeri armed forces facing a very low-budget Armenian military. A little bit different than what's happening on the ground in this conflict. The Russian defense budget has ballooned to well over $80 billion. So just kind of give you a frame of reference, at the start of the conflict, it was about $60 billion. And it's now well over 80, 85 billion, possibly 90 billion, and quite possibly even higher than that, upwards to 100 billion. The entire Israeli defense budget, including direct U.S. aid to the Israelis, the entire defense budget for Israel, which is an incredibly competent military force with amazing technology, amazing ingenuity, is $25 billion. And the Russian budget is now, again, well over 80 billion. If you get a chance, look at the gold reserves. Look at the tonnage of gold that Russia possesses. Then look at what Ukraine possesses. I believe Serbia and Bulgaria has more gold than Ukraine. Now, you may simply wave that off as being nonsensical, but that matters. Believe you me, in the backgrounds of this conflict, gold matters. Not directly, indirectly. And compounding that, Russia has the ability to get a lot more of it. And they are. So again, this renewed offensive south of Orikhiv, directed towards Robotyne in this area here, it definitely appears to have stalled. We have seen a multitude of video footage of Ukrainian armored brigades, armored battalion sets, company sets, just getting obliterated by Russian anti-tank guided weapons teams, drones, artillery, what have you. It is a terrifying proposition to be in a Ukrainian mechanized unit attempting offensive operations in these fields. Is it going to switch? There it goes. So this gives you an idea of what the Ukrainians are trying to conduct offensive operations. Imagine going into Kansas, Nebraska, here in the United States. Vast open fields with hedges of foliage separating fields, with very long distances of line of sight. Again, if you look here and we go measure all the way down to this tree line, it's 3.6 kilometers. And the Ukrainians are having to circumnavigate this over these vast fields, while Russian Ka-52 attack helicopters, Mi-28s, Hind, upgraded helicopters, upgraded Hinds, Mi-24s, are sitting back 8 to 14 kilometers behind the line of contact, firing anti-tank guided weapon systems. The weather. Is the weather coming into play? Yeah, maybe for fixed-wing aircraft. But the Russians are still able to drop GLONASS bombs, GPS type of systems. The helicopters, the Russian attack helicopters, hover just meters off the ground, well below cloud coverage, and are able to pick off these Ukrainian units that are maneuvering or trying to maneuver south. So that is why we are probably seeing the Ukrainian military start to target areas deep inside of Russia. Is it going to change what is happening on the ground? No, probably not. Well, I'm not going to say probably not. It definitely will not change what is happening on the ground. And remember, the Russian military-industrial complex, the generally accepted numbers in terms of Russian production is now the Russians are producing monthly what the Russians had produced in all of 2022. And that's increasing. The Russian war economy is continuing to evolve, again, not just in manpower, in production, but adapting and integrating new technologies. New technologies that are going to be pivotal in this conflict and are showing so right now. The Lancet drone is proving to be an incredible nuisance. So that's kind of where we set for today. We will continue to monitor things very, very closely. Again, we're pretty much calling this another failed Ukrainian operation south of Orikhiv. The battle for Robotyne will probably, I won't say probably, will go down as a catastrophic defeat for Ukrainian forces. Eventually, as we look back on this conflict, mark my words, the battle for Robotyne, the Ukrainian offensive south of Orikhiv, will go down as a horrendous loss that could possibly change the dynamics of this conflict going forward. More to come very, very soon. And as always, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.